Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 23. Today I have for you an interview with one of the most delightful humans and writers probably on the entire planet, Aiden Thomas, and I'm not even going to delay us anymore. Here is the interview. Thank you so much for joining me today. To get us started, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and your books. And while you do that, I am going to require that you brag on yourself.
Brag on myself?
Yes. We're so bad at it. So I'm going to make
so
you brag.
Bad at it. What is it about writing like specifically as a job that feels like so like cringe and embarrassing whenever like you talk about yourself? I don't know what that is. I'm always like embarrassed. I'm like, yeah, I write books.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Why is that cringe? It's great. So my name, I don't know what to start with. So hi, I'm Aiden Thomas. I am the author of Cemetery Boys, Lost in the Neverwoods, and coming out in September, I have the first book in a duology that is called the Sunbearer Trials. Bragging about myself, God, this is such a difficult question. I guess one that I'm like pretty proud of. I feel mixed feelings about it, but Cemetery Boys was the first book written by an out trans author about a trans character to ever hit the New York Times bestseller list. And as far as I know, is still the only one, which is upsetting. It's cool, but it's also deeply, deeply upsetting because I need other people to come join me. And frankly, I think Felix Ever After by Kiss and Calendar should have been the first one to hit list, but
yeah, I'm just having I could have sworn that one did, but
yeah, right.
in my head it is. I'm like, oh, of course, that one, of course, hit the list.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we, especially in YA, like we've come so far, and yada yada. It's like, yes, but we still have a long, long, long road ahead of us.
Yeah, I think there's this little bit of a, I guess, catch-22, and maybe this is just a me thing, so we'll see. But like, I feel like there is simultaneously this pressure to be sort of like the first and the trailblazer and the like whatever. So then when you like aren't the first, you're like, oh, wimp, wimp, I shouldn't even bother, which that might just be a me thing. But then when you are the first and the only, then it's like, okay, but why am I still just the first and the only?
Yeah, it's rough, and there's like so much pressure on us as like queer creators in general to like do really well because you don't want to let people down and you want to like be creating space for other people to like come up and join you, but it's hard when you're in an industry and a society even I would say that is so determined to keep our voices down. So it's rough, but also exciting because eventually I will have more buddies and it'll be great.
Yes. There needs to be so many more, but I'm glad that you are out there paving the way. All right. So today, of course, we're going to talk about burnout. Of course, that is like the whole shtick of my podcast. And in particular, we are going to talk about how specifically being part of the LGBTQ plus community and other historically marginalized groups influences our experience of burnout. Before we even get to sort of like those nuances, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with burnout, and if it's different sort of before you broke into the industry and now after the fact.
It totally is. And then like really weird ways. When I was writing Cemetery Boys, for example, I was working full time and writing full time. And that was exhausting. But I think I was just so excited that it didn't really feel like work. And so now I'm doing it again. And I'm going through some really rough burnout currently, so this is just such good timing for us to talk about it.
I feel like the whole industry is just completely swamped with burnout, which is like the whole reason I became a life coach. I'm like, someone's got to deal with this, and it should be somebody who knows the specific writer like neuroses.
I agree. And I think the other thing to think about is like when I was drafting Cemetery Boys, we weren't in a global pandemic.
Yes.
So now it was so funny because writing Sunbearer Trials, which again is coming out in September, I had such a hard time writing it. It felt like I was pulling teeth. And I was like, why is this book so hard to write? Like, I wrote Cemetery Boys, the first draft, in 6 weeks, and this is taking me months. Like, what the heck is going on? And it took a lot of me, like, I'm constantly bothering my agent, Jennifer March Soloway. Shout out if y'all are looking for an agent. She's incredible. I like kept having these conversations with her. I was like, I don't know why this book is, I'm having such a hard time with it. And she had to keep being like, well, Aiden, we're going through a global crisis and we have group trauma that's happening as a world together. And, being stuck at home suddenly, I was living in a little tiny, less than 500 square foot studio apartment. So I was trapped in my little apartment all the time and not being able to go out and not being able to see people. You don't get to like refill your well when we were in quarantine and still, going through a pandemic. And that was, gosh, just so, it was so difficult. And it took her being like, everyone's going through this. It's not just you. Because I think as writers, we put so much onus and pressure on ourselves and being like, oh my God, everyone else is doing better at this than I am. When the truth is, like, if you literally like texted one of your other writer friends and we're like, are you holding up? Everyone is like, no,
not at all.
No, this sucks. Like, I can't produce anything good. And then, we still have all of our timelines and constraints, and, the publishing industry doesn't change for you or accommodate us just because our brains aren't working right and our hearts are sad. You know what I mean? It's like, it's still the machine that has to keep plugging forward. That's been trying. And now I'm starting the sequel to Sunbearer Trials, and it's not going great either.
Yeah. Oh, and this is your first like contracted sequel too, right?
Yeah. So
Sequels suck. Good luck.
Yeah, that's what everyone's telling me. I'm so worried about it. Yeah, everyone's like, book 2 and the sequel fucking sucks. And I was just like, okay. So I'm trying to like gaslight myself into not thinking that and just being like, this is going to be so easy. And like, look at your little outline and just vibe and it'll be okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I had to completely delete and start over my sequel, I think 4 times from scratch. It was, not, and thank God that was like pre-pandemic. I was writing that in 2019, I think. So
yeah.
But I've had a similar thing. When I wrote The Coldest Touch, I did the first draft of that. I sort of like finished it up as like COVID was sort of in the early months. And then it sort of worked out that my editor was also super freaked out. So she took several months to get back to me, which is perfect because I could not have done anything during that time anyway. But now I'm sitting where I'm typically a pretty quick drafter, but I've been working on the same freaking first draft for over a year. No. And I'm just like, what is happening? And I will say it's not just like literally the same first draft. Like I would write 10K and be like, that's not the right story. Delete. Write 20K. Oh, nope, that's not the story, which is better than writing the whole book and deleting it.
I mean, yeah.
But and it is finally, I'm like, okay, got the right story. It's going to get done probably this summer. In the next couple of months, I should have the first draft done. But like, awesome. I feel you. It's,
how long does it take you to write a first draft? Like, does it change between books or are you like pretty consistent?
It has changed a lot. And part of it is I write and revise kind of at the same time now. I used to just So I started writing with NaNoWriMo, was back in like 2012. So I was like,
as we all did.
Yeah. In a month, like 50K, rock it out. So I did my first 2 books that I ever wrote, which never got published. I wrote each of those in just 30 days. One of which was 90,000 words. That was like,
oh my gosh, that's wild.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I was so young then.
30 days. Oh my God. Yeah, imagine having having enough sleep to do that. I don't think I can pull it off anymore.
No. At the time I was only 24, which now at 33, I'm like, just a baby. I know it's like a full adult, but like, I'm just like, just a baby.
There's energy and love for our
craft. Yeah. And then I think it's just sort of gotten a little bit longer and longer, but now part of the reason why it takes so long is I sort of like write the book in fourths. So like write a fourth, just like drafting straight through and then pull back, look at it, revise, write the next to the midpoint, just drafting straight through, messy draft, and then pull back, which is what I'm at right now. I'm at the midpoint. I just pulled back, figured out what I need to do. And as I pulled back, I was like, oh, this is like, I have no scenes that I need to cut. I have no scenes I need to add. It's all actually pretty well there. And I'm like, oh,
That's
this is
nice.
what happens when it takes a year to get to this point. But like now that I'm here, it's like pretty okay.
Yeah.
So
Wild what like having some time to actually like focus
yeah.
can do for your
Hmm.
writing.
But yeah, so now it's my first drafts take a lot longer than they used to. But
Yeah.
when I finish it, I only have like the last quarter to edit by that point, and I can pretty much send it straight to my editor or agent,
Nice.
depending
So
on
it's
like,
like clean.
oh yeah, because
That's
it's
super
been
impressive.
revised. It used to be that I would, write in 4 to 6 weeks the full draft and then spend 4 or 5 months like doing a whole overhaul or basic rewrite
Yeah.
revision. So it's just a little bit of a different process.
Yeah, that sounds like such a I'm at the moment taking any and all feedback on drafting processes because it's been rough.
Yeah. Well, and part of it for me is that my brain, I find, works very differently, drafting versus revision. My drafting brain is like just little like sweet dummy. And just like I love her, but like no. And my revision brain
She's
is
just
like this like
vibing.
genius goddess who's like, woo, I know all the things. Like I was literally figuring out stuff yesterday and I was like, I'm a genius. But drafting just a total dummy and it's all great.
Yeah.
So for me, that is sort of my carrot of like, okay, if I just draft a quarter of the book, I get to revise because for me that's
Yeah.
fun. That's sort of my
Yeah.
like way to convince myself to keep going.
Yeah, and that makes sense because I enjoy revising so much more than drafting. I loathe drafting.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a lot of work to convince myself to do it. Because
Mm-hmm.
most of the time I'm just like, we're gonna have a bad time. This is hard. I don't want to do it. And then I have to like shake myself and be like, you're under contract. You have to do it. For me, usually when I'm really stuck, it's a matter of going back to what my original inspiration was and
Mm-hmm.
like getting excited about it again. I do this thing that's like pretty unhinged. And whenever I like tell my other author friends, they're like, I would never. But I have my friends read my first draft as I'm writing it. And a lot of people hate that because they're like, no, you won't see anything until like copy edit stage. But what I have found, yeah, what I found really useful is that because I loathe drafting so much, is having cheerleaders that are like,
Mm.
you did a chapter, Aiden. This is so cool, blah, 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 blah. I liked this about it. It helps me be like, yeah, this is fun. This is cool. I'm going to keep writing it. Like, I do like this story. It's just the burnout that gets to you when you're
Yeah.
tired and you feel like you're just trudging through it. And I think that that's kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to being a writer and an author, is that writing is such an isolated, insular thing
Mm-hmm.
that we do that it can feel really lonely and you can feel like you're stuck and you're by yourself in it. So kind of like whether they want to or not, dragging my friends into it and being like, let's do this together. Then it makes it like less painful.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's
and
always a big one for me.
especially if your like inner dialogue is like a real asshole, that makes that
Oh
like
yeah.
loneliness so bad. And I think
Yeah.
we're just conditioned to have like asshole brains. So unless you're actively like on the hunt for that and looking for
Yeah.
ways to be very kind to yourself, like very intentionally kind, it's so easy to just be like, you're an idiot. This book sucks. Like it's never
Yeah.
gonna, it's gonna fail. And it's so easy to do that. Like I even put
Yeah.
like, I love to put brackets when I'm drafting. And sometimes they're brackets of name this character and then so I don't have to like pause myself. But sometimes they're brackets where I'm like, I hate this. This is so stupid. And I leave it in so that I have like some extra word count. And then I was going through, I was like, oh, this isn't boring. I just wrote it so slowly over so many days that it felt like it took
Yeah.
forever, but it was like 2 paragraphs that was needed to be there. Like this scene is going nowhere. It's taking forever. It's only taking forever because you're writing it 5 minutes at a time between yelling at the 2-year-old. Like,
oh my gosh. Yeah. That's so valid. I also like I have my laptop, but I do most of my work on my desktop.
mm-hmm.
And I've always been big into reading craft books. That's something that really helps me when I am burnt out and when I feel like this is the worst book I've ever written. No one's going to want to read this. I take a break and I start reading a craft book. And usually there's like some kind of inspiration that, again, just gets me excited. Like reminds me of something that I'm trying to do in my story, and to kind of see someone talk about it, give examples, and like, again, just kind of spark that excitement makes a huge difference. I've been reading Never Say You Can't Survive by Charlie Jane Anders. And it's like a what's the tagline? It says, how to get through hard times by making up stories. Um,
Oh,
and yeah,
nice.
and it's honestly about writing during a global pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about writing while you're going through a traumatic experience, but also writing about trauma. It's really wonderful. I have just written so many notes and tagged post-its. Whenever I find a line that I find particularly inspiring, is I'll write it on a post-it and then I'll stick it to my desktop, my monitor screen. Just
I do
like
that.
to have like a row on the
Stick
bottom.
mine to my
Yeah,
like ring light.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine are even the same color. Pink.
Hot pink for anybody who, well, we're not
Hot
going to have the
pink.
video. So hot pink for
Yeah,
the audio
hot pink.
listeners.
Yeah, so I find that that helps a lot too. Even if it's not someone who's like directly talking to me, like having just like an expert being like, it's okay. You're gonna get through it. Here's some ways to try to get through it. And I'm like, okay, Charlie, I'll try to do it just for you.
Yeah, that's part of what I do with my clients who I work with is every week we meet for 45 minutes to an hour and we go through like what is it their sticking points, and sometimes it's story sticking points, sometimes it's one time I coached on just like anxiety and stress about the war in Ukraine, and so like real life things that really
Totally.
can get in the way of writing. And I found too, I don't know if this, again, I'm sure this is not true of all writers, but I've seen for sure in the YA community, sort of, we joke about this, but I think we joke about it because we do it, is that when we sort of start to feel things, we just shove it down real hard. It's like, I'm not going to deal with that. It's maybe not a writing thing. It's like a human thing, but that makes it so hard to like function and be creative when all of your emotions are like, you're all constipated emotionally. Like that's not a super
Oh my
helpful
God,
way to
yeah.
like tap into inspiration.
Yeah, I think I've found that like when it's like writing stuff, publishing stuff, and I'm just like so angry and frustrated about something, and I'm just like you, I try to like repress it because I don't want to like bother people like with my feelings and thoughts. And so I just kind of bottle it up, and then I get so mad, I eventually just kind of like pop and
Yes.
like just rant and vent to one of my friends about it. And then like in the moment I'm like, I'm so angry and I'm so disappointed about this thing and this is why I feel that way. And then usually by the end of that conversation I'm like, okay, we're not doing as bad as I thought. Like it's kind of just like you need to get it out of your system.
Yes.
And like when you're doing it with friends, again, who are also kind of writers and going through this whole horrible process together, it makes it a lot easier because you have like your family to kind of like lean on and to be going through this situation together. It makes a huge difference.
Definitely. I've definitely had a history of like, it's not that bad. It's fine to like minimizing everything that's ever happened to me. So now as an adult and as a life coach and as somebody who is like really actively working on like processing my emotions, who'd have thought this like super, healthy thing we do. It feels like shit in the moment when you're like,
Oh yeah.
you feel yourself needing to cry. And instead of pushing it down, you like sit down with a journal and write down all the reasons you're upset. And then you unlock this thing and you're just like, oh shit, now I feel really bad. And then you just sob your eyes out.
Yeah.
Then like 5 minutes later, you're like, God damn, I feel great now. Like I've just purged it and actually like dealt with it. There's this analogy that I love that one of my coaches uses where if you ever taken like a beach ball and like pushed it under the water, like in a pool or like in the beach or whatever, and it pops up. So when you push your emotions down, they're gonna pop up. So sometimes it happens like we'll see where folks like have like stress at work and they're like getting yelled at and they can't yell back at their boss. And when they come home, they like snap at their partner because they've been pushing it down all day. And not obviously you don't have to like be angry and then yell at your boss. You can just acknowledge the fact that like I'm really fucking angry and I'm just gonna like shake my fist really hard like in private and just like let that out. But we don't do that. We're not good at that. It's just well, and society doesn't let that be something that we are just considered doing, like it's not acceptable in a lot of ways.
Yeah, especially people who are assigned female at birth and who have been like raised as a feminine person. That's a huge onus and kind of expectation. And then when we're seen as acting out, then it's like, oh, you're overly emotional or whatever. So we're trained since being little kids to be pushing that down. And then now we have all these beach balls popping out of the ding dang pool.
Dang pool. It's actually a perfect segue to my next question. And something I talk about on this podcast basically every week is how exactly those social messaging and the different isms and the different types of oppression and all of that affects not only how we view ourselves, but how we view our work, and then how that in then turn impacts burnout. For example, I'll talk about how capitalism has conditioned us to equate our worth with our productivity.
Totally.
super, not the best. And then again, patriarchy conditions us, especially those socialized as women, to dismiss our authority and always like look to external sources to tell us what we should do to be good enough, to be worthy.
Yeah.
And so kind of with that said, I would love to bring in now some of the discussion on how being part of the LGBTQ community affects your relationship with writing and burnout and, pressures that we face within this community that maybe other writers don't.
Yeah, I mean, the big one is the pressure that you just said. Like I said, being the only trans person in fiction who has ever had like a trans book that hit the list. It's when I was writing Cemetery Boys, I wasn't being like, I'm going to write the first book like this, and that's my goal. It's like, no, I was just trying to write a book about a kid who was like me, and then suddenly people pointed out that it was the first, and I say that with air quotes because traditional publishing compared to indie and small press, yada yada yada. I won't get into all that. And not only that, but kind of society, especially when you come from a marginalized background, specifically when you're a writer of color, is that suddenly a lot of folks assume that the story you're writing is sort of a monolith for like, so like Cemetery Boys is, people are like, oh, this is the experience of the Latinx kid. And it's like, no, like we just want to have that breathing room to write stories that reflect our own personal experiences. And those differ so greatly across people within the same marginalized identity. And at the same time, it's just hard and it's kind of ugly. And I'm thinking specifically what I'm going through right now in terms of pressure and just kind of scariness, specifically around my identity, is that, Cemetery Boys is one of the books that Ted Cruz decided needed to be banned. So now my book's getting banned all over the place, like in school districts and libraries. And it's hard because it's like, to myself, it's like, oh, I need to be unfazed by this and I need to be strong and keep pushing forward. But at the same time, it's degrading and it's heartbreaking to kind of be seeing all this news about people who are denying your identity or saying that there's something inherently wrong or obscene just about who you are. And yeah, it's just interesting because it's like authors who aren't marginalized, who aren't queer, like never have to go through the experience of being online and like getting just attacked for just being who you are, and like what kind of added pressure that puts on when you're trying to be like a creative person. It hurts your heart. And then, suddenly I'm trying to write these books with the intention of sparking joy for trans kids and queer kids and making them feel seen and appreciated and like powerful, while also give them like, funny characters and stuff like that. It's hard. It's hard to create that kind of content when your society is, making you feel so bad, and not just bad, but unsafe. And so that's really hard to get through. And the only thing that pulls me through it, that I have to kind of keep reminding myself, is that I'm writing these books for, the younger versions of Aiden, the teens that are out there and young adults that are out there right now who are going through the same trauma as me, maybe not as publicly, but they're still seeing people, they're still seeing me being attacked for who I am. And they share those identities. So it's basically just a way of them, seeing it being done to themselves. And that's really hard. And that's why I know that I have so many young folks who follow me on like Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, that I try not to delve into that heavy stuff because I don't want to contribute to their own trauma. But then it's like, okay, what am I doing for myself?
Right.
And so it's just kind of like, I'm always just kind of being like, that's what gets me through it, is being like, I'm writing these books for those teens. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm here. That's my purpose. And that's what grounds me. But some days are a lot harder than others.
Well, and there's a couple of parts that I kind of want to talk about a little bit more. And first is the thing that's coming up for me is just when that stuff is happening, one, I just want to give you like a big virtual hug because that's so shitty, but also like, it's like, okay to like not put on like privately that brave face and not be unaffected. Like, of course you're going to be affected by that. Like that is so shitty. And it's not just this like internet scariness. Like for trans people, like violence is a very real danger.
Yeah.
And so like, of course you feel unsafe, and like giving yourself space to really like think, and I process that and figure out where is the actual like safety going to come from, like both emotionally and mentally, but then also giving yourself the space to have conversations. Like if you're going to do public events, do people have your back? Like, do you have that stuff set up? And not to like, try to mother you and tell you what to do, but like, just like for the people listening, it's a very real thing to be part of these communities and to have genuine safety concerns. And then of course the emotional, I also think we tend to be an anxious bunch, I think in general too. So there's like the anxiety, feeling unsafe, that's like not super grounded in reality, that we can sort of deal with and figure out what's real and what's not. But then also like the real active considerations of safety too, that is like something to actively consider. Have you gotten like a surge of like harassment online because of your book being called out in this way? Yeah, I figured, but like, yeah.
Oh yeah, there's lots of harassment. It's funny because like when people started noticing I existed, like before Cemetery Boys came out, I kind of quickly learned that I needed to shut down all of my social media. Not shut down, lock up my social media is what I mean. So like one of the first things I did was my Twitter. I don't get notifications from people who don't have some kind of verified account, so an email or a phone number. And I have words that I have muted so that I don't see people just kind of like spewing hate at me. On Instagram, I also have my DMs locked down. So on both Twitter and Instagram, if I follow you, you can message me. I find the really like nice messages that people send me, and I take screenshots of those.
Yes.
And I save them in a folder on my phone. So I'm feeling like really bad and like kind of down about myself, I'll open that up and I'll reread them. And it's like really wonderful things, like from a parent who got Cemetery Boys and read it with their kid, and because the kid came out as trans. Or I have a lot of young readers who read Cemetery Boys and are like, I like identified so much. I like took either Julian or Yadriel's name, which is always just makes me, oh my God, like a goopy little mess. Yeah, it's really wonderful.
So sweet.
It's the sweetest thing ever. I have people who get tattoos. I get people who, I have like another good example and I can't think. Oh, I get a lot of, not even just like younger people, but like, folks our age who are like, I read Cemetery Boys and realized I was trans. Like I was at Y'all West on a live panel, and someone came to ask a question and was like, this is more of a statement than a question. And I was like, oh, but
no.
They were like, I read Cemetery Boys and realized I was trans, and like everyone cheered, and I was like, that's so cool. So yeah, so there's a lot of ugly, and there's ways that I think marginalized creators should really protect themselves when it comes to social media, which is what I do for my own self-care, but also being like having secretly the fact that I can go into my message requests and kind of find those really nice, like sweet and warm messages that are like, okay, yes, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why it's worth it. And yeah, I think that's fun.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think everybody should have, some sort of like happy folder where it's just like whatever it is, whether it's things that people send you. I should take my own advice and do this, because like every now and then I get tagged in like fan art, and that always just makes my heart so warm, especially when they're like young, they're like 12, 13, and you can tell, and they're just like, I'm like, oh, you're so sweet. I love it. I love it so much. My favorite actually I had recently was also in my request. Somebody messaged me because of the coldest touch and like discussing the use of like they them pronouns with like the person sitting next to them, they met the person who they ended up having like a huge crush on, and now they're like,
stop.
And I'm like
I love that so much.
It was one of the coolest things. Actually, probably the coolest thing that ever happened to me was when I used to work at the LGBTQ center in my town. A teen came in, and I had this like really beautiful like YA section that I kind of curated and got from donations from our peers. And this teen comes in and recommends my own book to me, and I was like, this is the coolest moment of my life. Oh my
God. I would
have like, died. Oh, you should have this book here. And I was like, oh, we do. It's just out right now. And also I wrote it. I was like, so cool.
Funny. I was actually at Powell's last week. I go there a lot, just in general. And I was looking at, they always have a display of queer YA, just 20 like year round. And I was standing at it and I was looking at books that I wanted to pick up. And these group of 3 teenagers came up and were looking at it. and they touched the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. And I like just kind of like leaned over and I was like, that's a really good book. I was like, you should get that one. My friend wrote that book. And they're like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And then we were like talking about books, and I kept pointing to one. I was like, this one, I've read this one too, and it's really good, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, wow, you read a lot of YA. I was like, oh yeah, I write. And they're like, oh, they're like, what do you write? And then like Cemetery Boys was on that display, and I pointed to it. I was like, I wrote that one. And they're like, oh my God, it was really cute. And then I ended up signing personal copies for them while I was there, and they checked it out with them. But it's really cool. It's fun.
Oh, yeah, that is part of what COVID kind of took away, is the ability to like be in person with readers.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because you came out during COVID, right? You did, because like you didn't. So both of your books came out during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
fun.
That was heartbreaking. Originally, Cemetery Boys was supposed to come out on June 9th, which I loved because it was 6/9, and I was like, yeah. They emailed me. I want to say like it must have been like early April. And I saw that everyone's books were getting bumped back, and I was just like, it's just a matter of time before they tell me about mine. So I got that email, and they're like, hey, we're bumping it back till September 1st. And I was like, okay. Then I published 2 books during a pandemic, and coming up on the 3rd in September. And honestly, it was really heartbreaking because the whole reason, like I mentioned, that I became an author to begin with is because I wanted to write for young people, and I wanted to be able to interact with my readers, you know what I mean? And so to have all of that taken away for not just one book, but for 2 books has been absolutely heartbreaking. And I was so upset, and it made everything feel very fake. You know, it's like, I'm a well-known author. I'm on the New York Times bestseller list. Again, more air quotes. But according to what? My laptop? Like, I've seen no physical evidence of this. This could all just be a very elaborate ploy. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all a simulation.
Yeah, so that was heartbreaking. The first time I ever got to meet readers in person was at Y'all Fest in South Carolina, like half a year ago at this point. And it was the best thing that's ever happened to me. Just being able to like finally talk to readers, and like, it's the coolest. It's like, it's the best part of the job. So
yeah, my books came out in 2019, the first one. So I had one like summer where I had like my book came out, and I had a launch event, and I got to like go up to Toronto and like do a few things, which for me, I'm like definitely a homebody by nature. So like I was like, same. I went to like Boston, and I was like, wow, look at me. And then my next 2 books, it was like, wah, wah. I mean, I love online too, because I get, readers get to see me who live not in my area. And I also am kind of like, I kind of hate travel a little bit, because I would much rather just like not leave my house. But I wish I could just like teleport readers into my backyard, and we'll have like a cool little like barbecue, and then like send them home. Like, but they'd never know where my address is. Like, like, right. Like, come here, and then I'll teleport you all away, and then I can be back on my couch 5 minutes later. Like,
that would be the ideal situation. I would even say for me as well. Yeah, I'm a homebody.
But I have had one in-person event, actually 2 now. I've had one I did that was like a just me, like kind of meet and greet kind of thing with a local LGBTQ center. And then I helped Jennifer Dugan launch her most recent book. So I went out to Albany to see her and do that. So it was nice to be in person again. So like, it was like, it's nice to be back. And then of course I didn't get home till like midnight because I had to drive. So I'm like, it's so nice to be out, but also I miss my dogs.
But also I'd like to immediately be in my bed.
Yes, I know. Why do we not have teleportation yet? Like, we need to get on that. Like, come on. All right. So we've actually talked about it sort of around it a couple of times, but I would love to know, just sort of like for you, how do you know when you're like coming up on burnout? Like for you, like what are sort of like the symptoms where you're like, oh, I am like getting into a place that I'm going to have to recover from?
It's funny because you would think that it's the opposite, but I can tell when I'm getting burnout when I'm staying up way too late and getting nothing done.
Yes.
Usually if I'm on like a good cadence, I'm getting my 8 hours. I'm like in bed, asleep. 11 is the ideal time. But when I'm in burnout, which is what's happening right now, I'm not going to sleep till like 3 o'clock. There was a couple of nights where the sun was coming up, and I was like, this should not be happening. And I think it's coming from a place of like, I got no work done. Like, I'm burnt out and I'm not producing as much writing. And if I'm not producing as much writing, that means I'm doing a bad job. And then I'm like, okay, I need to stay up and keep working. But when you're tired and you force yourself to stay up, that actually doesn't help at all. It also definitely doesn't produce good writing.
Right. The writing you do get's not amazing. Yeah.
Right. And then I end up being up late, and then I still am trying to like wake up at 9 o'clock to like stay on a schedule so that I'm not wasting hours during the day, whatever that means, because I have so much other admin stuff to take care of. Like it's not, the writing job is not just writing, it's everything else that goes around with it. And that's difficult. So it's usually when I'm staying up way too late and getting like no word count done, that's why I'm like, okay, we're in a bad spot. That's a big flag for me for sure.
I'm curious. So like, I'm just like, my brain is trying to like switch into coach mode, but I'm just like curious, like, what does that look like for you? Like, are you like at your computer with like the document open, but then you keep finding yourself doing other things, or you put the work away, but then you feel like too guilty to like go to bed? Like, what does that like kind of like, what does that look like?
It's both. But yeah, a lot
both
of it
is good.
I have my laptop, I have my documents open and stuff like that. And usually what it turns into is like, okay, well, the words aren't coming, so why don't I work on some of this other stuff? And the other stuff can take hours, just hours upon hours. There's no end in sight. Like I can always be working on something else that's not writing. So I'd be like, well, if I'm not writing, at least I'm signing tip-ins, or at least I'm reading a craft book. But it gets to a point where it's just like, well, I'm just not writing and I'm not sleeping either. So that's not good. And then trying to figure out how to course correct and out of desperation.
Yeah. I get so fired up about this topic because so much of this it's not just any one writer. Like the fact that this is like every writer that this is happening to tells me that this is like a societal / publishing problem and not like an us problem.
Yeah.
Because every writer I know does this, especially like as the deadline starts to get closer.
Yeah.
Where we're just like, we get in this sort of like feedback loop of I'm not doing enough. And when you think you're not doing enough, you do all this shit that causes you to do even less. And it's just like this terrible cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the best.
No.
If you're looking for advice, my advice would be to set really teeny tiny baby goals. Like absurdly small, like stupid. It's like so small where you're like, this doesn't even matter. And then you give yourself ridiculous amounts of celebration every time you do it. So you get like a positive feedback loop going.
I like that a lot. Last week, my friend finally convinced me to try time blocking. So that's when I really sit down and I just block out time all day of being like, I'm writing, I'm eating, I'm going to the gym, I'm taking a nap, I'm taking my dog to daycare, I'm writing, kind of really sticking to that. So I'm playing with that right now. But I think I love
right. The naps that are in there. I used to be so superior, like, oh, I never take naps. And now I'm like, naps all the time. Naps are the best.
Listen, if I ever have 30 minutes of downtime, I'm like, I can take a nap. But yeah, I think I really like your idea, especially because obviously, like I've said over and over again, the excitement of it is kind of what keeps me going. So I think having tiny little celebrations would be immensely helpful. So maybe I'll do that. I'll lower my expectations even more and just be like, here's this one small thing. If you can do that, you've all done a good job.
It's so funny though, is because the smaller we set our expectations, it sounds counterintuitive, but the more we actually end up doing.
Totally, yeah.
Because when your brain is like, oh,
intimidating.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The brain is wired to avoid spending energy. So when you're like, I have to write 3,000 words or whatever your thing is, your brain's like, well, that sounds terrible. No, thank you. But if you're like, I just have to open the document and stare at it for 5 minutes, the brain's like, I could do that. And then once you get in it, you're like, oh, okay, this isn't so bad.
You have to like trick yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like work with your brain, not against it. Like, I'm a huge proponent of that.
Maybe I need to have you be my writing coach because I'm going through it right now. And maybe that would be helpful.
I mean, I'm available.
Okay. Good to know.
Well, no, and that's so much of what it is. And I have this whole like rant I need to do on the podcast, honestly, about like writing advice and how we just end up using it against ourselves. And actually I did do a podcast on this already. Came out this week, where it's like we take writing advice, like write every day or whatever it is. Yeah. And then instead of using what's useful, we just take it to gatekeep ourselves of like, oh, well, I can't do that, therefore I'm not good enough, therefore I can't be a writer. We just sort of like use it against ourselves instead of, or especially like folks who have like ADHD or anxiety or like other things that like their brain is wired differently.
Both of those.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's like, instead of trying to cram ourselves into like, well, it has to be done this way, just like work with your brain instead of trying to like force it into a pattern that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I want to tell you about some of the like complications I'm having in book 2, but there's spoilers, so I can't talk about it on the podcast.
We can talk about it after we stop recording.
Yeah. But yeah, that all sounds, yeah, it's really just finding what works for your brain. And then like totally what you were saying was like totally resonating with me, and being like, if I don't fulfill this like write every day, then it's like, I didn't write today, I'm a failure, I am so bad at this, which then just like snowballs into a bigger issue. And you know, it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm also totally guilty. One of my things that I'm working on right now is, as soon as I'll like put sort of my like minimums for the day, and then like my bonus things that I could do for the day if I want to, is like the only reason I have to do those. And I'll like finish both of those buckets of things, and I'll have some free time. And instead of enjoying free time, I'm like, what else can I do? What else can I do? Like I can get ahead on something. And I'm like, no, it's okay to
calm
just
down.
do nothing. That's like allowed. Yeah. Like we've already done all the things. So that's my current work of like, I very much like always need to be doing something. I get like antsy.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too. People think resting is going to feel really good, but if you've been conditioned for decades to be productive, resting feels terrible.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. As someone who put themselves entirely through undergrad and grad school, and I worked 3 jobs in undergrad, 2 jobs in grad school, one of which was a full-time job. Yeah, it's the like, you have to be working your butt off the whole time.
Did you get like an MFA, or like what's your degree?
Yeah, I got my MFA in creative writing.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, I hated it. It was awful.
What was your undergrad?
My undergrad, I double majored in English creative writing and psychology, with a specialization in abused, neglected, and transracially adopted children. So attachment theory, basically. Yeah. So that's what I did. And then I was an EMT in Oakland, California for a year. Yeah. And then I was like, I'm gonna get my MFA. And then I got my MFA. My thesis for grad school was Lost in the Neverwoods. So I wrote that whole book while I was
I think I saw that like online somewhere.
Yeah.
That. Yeah. And you had sold that first, and then Cemetery Boys sort of got like swapped to be the debut. Yeah. So fun. Publishing is wild.
Just wild.
It's always so fun too, like to see the people who sort of go the like school like writing route versus folks like my degrees have absolutely nothing to do with writing at all. And just to see like there's so many paths to
there are
being a writer, which is just fun.
And I say this all the time, but higher education is like low key a scam. And so when people, oh my God,
oh my
and
God,
by low
yes,
key,
I could go on.
High key a scam.
Yes.
And I say this all the time, but I did not learn how to write when I was in school. I learned how to write after getting my MFA and buying books by writers. So like Jessica Brody, Say the Cat Writes a Novel, the best book ever. And I took her Udemy course too. She has a bunch of online courses, which are, because I'm a very visual person. So like watching her talk, I'm also deaf, so that helps also. And like seeing the visuals helps my brain more. And just like picking up a craft book and like reading those, like that's how you can get your writing education. You don't have to go to school for it.
Oh yeah, I'm 100% self-taught. I didn't do any kind of anything. Yeah. But it's also like, you know, I went to music school, which is equally ridiculous. So I got used to like, I wrote music for college. So I got very used to like critique. That's why I'm like the master of getting critique. I'm the master of revision because I went through it in undergrad for something unrelated, but like totally transferred skill.
I prepped you for it.
So just to sort of wrap up, because I know we're sort of getting close to the hour mark. So I guess 2 things. So one, when you do find yourself in this mode of staying up too late and you're sort of like coming up on burnout, what are some of the things you do to sort of shift out of that? Or is it something where you sort of like, it runs its course until the deadlines hit and then you have to like recover after?
I will say that my Aiden says this all the time. I work really good under deadline, and like the closer it gets to deadline, like the faster and more I produce. But that's not healthy. So the healthier way of dealing with it that I have learned over time is to tell my friends about it, because it's so funny. The way my brain works is wild. When I was trying to draft this new book that I'm currently working on, the sequel, I would keep like talking to my friends and being like, I need advice. Can you help me like get an outline together? Blah, blah, blah. So they did all this like back end work to kind of help prep me. And I was like, okay, all I have to do is write it. And I went a week and was unable to write anything. And then finally I like went to those friends and I was like, I've been like low key lying to you. I haven't been able to start writing it. And now I am terrified and I'm panicking. And they're like, yeah, Aiden, we knew you didn't send it to us. So we knew you hadn't read it yet. Like you're not
fooling anybody.
Tricking us. Yeah. You're some mastermind of manipulation. They're like, yeah, we know. Also, we have access to those docs. We can see that you haven't added anything. And so I was like, oh. And they were like, but they didn't want to like stress me out by being like, hey, we noticed you haven't written anything. So finally being able to sit down and being like, I'm going to cry because I feel like I can't get anything done. And then to have them kind of strategize and come up with ways to like get through that burnout and to like find the spark again worked a lot of wonders.
Yeah, they say with like raising kids, it takes a village. I think it is very much the same with like raising a book. Like it takes.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah, my CPs and my friends are without them, I would have no books.
Yeah, it's such a funny thing because the act of writing itself is so solitary, but publishing a book is actually a very collaborative process. Like the writing itself is not, but it's the CPs and the editors, like that part of it. It does, in some ways, it's very collaborative. And then you're working with marketing and sales. Yeah. It's just a lot of people who have their hands in a book, but ultimately you're sort of like the last say.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Is there anything else about burnout that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to mention?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot, which is nice. All right. Then.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to, of course, put links to your website and buy links to all your books in the show notes. Is there an indie store we can direct readers to that's like a local one for you?
Powell's is my local indie store and I adore them and they're so nice to me. So yeah, if you want to support them by buying, Cemetery Boys, Lost in the Neverwoods, they often have signed copies by me because they can't get rid of me. And they keep selling them. So, or you could also pre-order the Sunbearer Trials, which comes out September 6th.
Yeah. Do you want to give us a real quick pitch for that?
Yeah. So when I sent it to my editor, I pitched it as Mexican Percy Jackson meets the Hunger Games. And what it is, it's a second world fantasy with a whole pantheon that I created, inspired by Mexican culture. And basically, gods are alive and well and live in this world, and their omniscient god is Sol, who is the sun. And every 10 years 10 demigods are selected by Sol to compete in the Sunbearer Trials, and the winner becomes the Sunbearer, who then refuels all the sunstones at each temple, which keeps the place safe and keeps the sun like literally fueled and in the sky. But the loser becomes the sacrifice that fuels the sun. So yeah.
Okay, I love that.
My main character is Teo, and he is very unexpectedly chosen to compete in the trials. And suddenly he is pitted up against these demigods who have trained their entire lives to be Sunbearer. And now he has to figure out how to survive.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, if you have arcs, I need one. No pressure.
Yeah, I can make that happen. No, that's fine.
Amazing. Yeah, sounds so good. And that's YA also, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you also writing middle grade? I feel like I saw something like that.
Everybody's writing middle grade. I'm not.
Okay.
If I ever were to write a different age range, it would be middle grade. I don't think I can do adult because I'm not like enough of an adult to like write about adults yet. So I'm just sticking with the kids for now.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, so to all the listeners, I will have all of the links and they will go directly to Powell's website so you can get them, support the local indies. And thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast, then you've got to get on my email list. You'll get my best advice sent right to your inbox with concrete steps on how to stay in love with writing and banish burnout for good. Go to isabelsterling.com/join to sign up. When you do, you'll get one of my favorite worksheets, the 5 causes of writer's block. I teach you how to diagnose why you're stuck and how to get writing again. That's isabelsterling.com/join. See you next week.